want you to know that all the people of Ukraine to know as well. The American people have been with you every step of the way, and we will stay with you. We will stay with you for as long as it takes. I believe we'll have the funding necessary to support Ukraine as long as it takes. And we're going to be there as long as that takes. We'll continue to supply Ukraine with critical weapons and equipment as long as we can. As long as that takes. As long as we can. As long as it takes. As long as we can.
Okay, so we all know that this war in Ukraine, this Russia special military operation, is not going so well for the Ukrainians and for their American sponsors, for the puppet masters in DC and in London. So we're just going to talk about a few things going on. We're going to discuss how the West is coping a bit and how the West is changing their outlook on warfare based on what's happening in Russia. So when things popped off in 2022, millions of Ukrainian men tried to flee, even though they were deemed the bravest men in the history of the universe. Millions of Ukrainian men took off running. They said over 6 million men escaped the country. So they banned any man from the age of 18 to 60 from leaving the country. And now you have what's called press gangs going around in Ukraine. And they're taking men, literally snatching them out of the bed, snatching them off the streets, forcing them to conscript into the Ukrainian army to go out there and die. The average life expectancy for a Ukrainian man sent to the battlefield is about 4 hours. So these men know once they're put in uniform, once they're given their couple of days, or if they're lucky, a couple of weeks of training, they go out there and they try to use some type of equipment that they have no idea how to use, and then they get killed. That's what's been going on. The Ukrainians have lost so many people that they're snatching men off the streets. Let's look at this New York Times, because I know a lot of people in the West, they love them some Western media and they'll completely believe anything that it says. So let's look at New York Times. People snatchers. Ukraine's recruiters use harsh tactics to fulfill ranks. So we're going to look at a little excerpt from this article here, just a little bit, just to get an idea of what's going on here. With Ukraine's military facing mounting deaths in a stalemate on the battlefield, army recruiters are becoming increasingly aggressive in their efforts to replenish the ranks, and in some cases pulling men off the streets, whisking them to recruiting centers using intimidation and even physical force. Recruiters have confiscated passports, taken people from their jobs, in at least one case tried to send a mentally disabled person to military training, according to lawyers, activists, and Ukrainian men who have been subject to coercive tactics. Video of soldiers shoving people into cars and holding men against their will, sound like kidnapping, and recruiting centers are surfacing with increasing frequency on social media and in local news reports. So this is something that's been happening from jump, something that has been happening more and more as more and more bodies of Ukrainian men pile up. I showed months ago, I showed the graveyards, hundreds of thousands of young men in these Ukrainian graveyards. They had so many bodies over the last year that they ran out of space in the graveyards. They were digging up old bodies to bury the new soldiers who've been killed recently. But people didn't believe this. Oh no, this is just Russian body information. This is fake. There's no way. The Ukrainians are invincible. They're a bunch of Captain Americas over there. They can't get killed. That's what the people said, because the Western media told them different, because you had way more support for the Ukrainian war, and a lot of people were still under the impression that Ukraine was quote unquote winning. But reality is starting to kick in, and it's getting harder and harder to push this propaganda, even though a lot of people are going to believe it no matter what, because once people have been brainwashed, it's pretty hard to unbrainwash them. So they're saying a stalemate. There's not a stalemate. It looks like Russia is completely in control of this battle, and they're being extremely lethargical. They're being extremely patient. They don't need to bomb rush. They don't need to send 200,000 men to Kyiv. They can just slowly push up, because it's a battle of attrition. They're going to bleed out the Ukrainian population because Ukraine keeps throwing people at them for no reason, even though they should surrender. And then they're going to burn out the American coffers. So the United States has spent so much money in this. All this expensive equipment, all of these supplies, all of this information has been extremely expensive. And we can see now in Congress, we can see now among the American people that most of the countries can't stomach these costs anymore, especially with all the problems happening. So the Russians said, look, let's move extremely slowly towards the Dnieper River. We don't need to bomb rush and lose unnecessary lives. And the American people are going to grow impatient with all the spending. It's going to get hard for the United States to just keep printing money like that. And the Ukrainians are going to run out of men, which we've seen, which is why they're forcing people off the street. There are words that they have captured units of old men. We got men in their 50s and 60s surrendering. The Russians have videos of old men in uniform. They weren't soldiers. They're not career soldiers. They were just normal, everyday men, working men who were forced to join the Ukrainian army. They went out there to fight the Russians. They're surrendering. A Ukrainian tank was destroyed, was disabled. They pulled out the tank driver. The guy was 70 years old. So this is something going on in Ukraine, and this is something that the media has been hiding from jump. In fact, let's look at this excerpt here from Sputnik News. Faced with a lack of able-bodied volunteers, the Ukrainian government resorted to truly draconian measures such as banning men between 18 and 60 years of age from leaving the country and forcibly drafting people into service, with the military recruitment in Ukraine quickly devolving into press ganging. So, this is hard to hide. These sources are having to admit what's going on. You have people in Ukraine being smuggled out. They're being smuggled out into Romania, into Poland. And a lot of them are just surrendering and running over to Russia and to Belarus, because what they don't want to do is be out there on the battlefield fighting in rich men's war and being killed. You're going to be a normal everyday man. You 30 years old, got a family, mind your own business. They snatch you up, make you go out there and fight some rich man's war. You're dead, forgotten about. Once they put your body in the ground, some look makeshift cemetery that they got over there, you gone forever, and these rich men move on with their life, and they don't give a damn about you. Your family is left in ruins while your body rots in the ground. So these people don't want them to do it, and they're being forced to do it by Zelensky and his administration. That's why I keep saying that there's going to be some massive upheaval in Ukraine. I don't know if Zelensky, he's going to run out of the country. He's going to get knocked off. Something's going to happen, because we already have some violence going on over there. That's another thing that the media is hiding, but that's a different video. But one of the reasons why, the main reason, really, why this whole thing is happening, why they lost so many people, is because the U.S. government started to believe its own propaganda. The U.S. media pushed all this information disseminated by Washington, disseminated by the politicians, to the American public. So for years, you say, well, the Americans, we're far above everybody else. We're completely invincible. Nobody can ever touch us. We're the greatest military in history, even though you have a decades-long losing streak. You're strategically failing in your objectives, war after war after war. But people continue to believe this. So they said, look, let's just send them some weapons. Let's give them American tactics. And let's remember, we've been saying that the Russians are stupid, the Russians are dumb, and the Russians can't fight. The Russians are scary. They're going to run away and all of that. So the American military, the American government, the politicians started to believe their own propaganda. Let's just give these guys some NATO training, some NATO weapons, and like magic, the Russians will be defeated. Completely failed. So they sent over a 3-star General Agudo over there to Ukraine. So let's look at some of the stuff that General Agudo discovered. So Russia is jamming U.S. precision weapons in Ukraine? What? So let's look at this paragraph here. Unidentified U.S. defense officials previously told CNN that Russia was jamming U.S. provided precision missiles, causing them to go astray. U.S. and Ukrainian forces consequently had to create workarounds, such as modifying the rocket launchers. Russia then modified its jamming, forcing the U.S. to again find countermeasures. So all of these magic, powerful, super tech, future type weapons that the United States is advertising, that they're pushing out, they're not working. You send over the Bradleys, you send over these German tanks, you send over the British Storm Shadows, you send over all these munitions, all these rocket senders, the HIMARS, the Stingers, you send over all of this stuff with American intel, American intelligence, American training, American tactics. It's not working. The general is saying about this specific situation, but it's happening overall. That we tried to use this tactic, we tried this move against the Russians, and the Russians easily countered us and stopped us. The problem is these people were believing their own propaganda. They're acting as if Russia is some caveman country like they've been fighting in the Middle East for the last 20 years. Russia is a modern army and very formidable, which is why presidents and politicians in the past actually respected Russia. They actually never used the term enemy when talking about the Russians. They actually respected the Russian position. They actually considered Russian national security when it came to American foreign policy. But now these politicians have completely thrown that out. They don't care about anything. It's a lot of Russian hatred going on, and it's being spread across the country. You see Russians being kicked out of American universities, Russians being kicked off the internet in America. I mean, it sounds like xenophobism or racism, something like that, whatever liberals want to push. But these people shouldn't believe their own hype. So you coming over here believing that you're just going to storm them. Oh, we can set some counteroffensive. We're just going to roll in with our Bradleys and with a couple of cruise missiles coming from the storm shadow, some HIMARS, and we'll completely wipe them out. You're not in 1991 Iraq. This ain't 2003 Iraq when you had your coalition of the willing, or 1991 when America was the sole superpower in the world after the fall of the Soviet Union. These Americans need to realize they're in over their heads in this thing. There's no way in hell Ukraine was ever going to win. And even if the Americans themselves go on the ground in Eastern Europe, it's going to get really ugly, and the Americans won't even win that because they're not trained for it. They're not equipped for it. You're used to low intensity combat. When you're going over there to these Middle Eastern countries, fighting in Syria and in Afghanistan, yeah, you're in a dangerous environment, but it's a low intensity combat environment by comparison. These Americans are not ready to fight a war against a modern army, a peer-to-peer war. So how are they going to train somebody on something that they never do? You're training them in your Middle Eastern insurgent tactics, but they're fighting against a modern military, something that the Americans haven't done since World War II. So it's a different type of war. So the Americans have spent all this time over there in Africa, in the Middle East. There's no resistance in the air. There's no modern technology. They built all these massive bases. The troops have all this downtime and freedom. They can do this and they can do that, go shopping and stuff. You can't do that in a peer-to-peer war. You can't build a massive FOB like that, massive command centers, big bulky installations, because you will get bombed and wiped out. So these Americans are starting to learn that this is a different type of war. In fact, the Americans are already adapting. So the new army chief, he's calling for major changes across the board, talking about the training, the division size. He wants to shrink down the division size, the unit sizes. He wants to do away with these big command centers, have these guys use electronics like tablets and stuff, wants them to be more mobile and less bulky, because he realizes that if the Americans fight Russia in Eastern Europe, they're going to get wiped out because their tactics are outdated. Their structure, their training is outdated. So there's a need for years long process that needs to happen in order to make America more modernized for 21st century warfare, because we're learning, looking at the Russians, looking at all the tactics they use, their defensive tactics, their drones, everything they've done to defeat NATO in their proxy war. The U.S. is making major changes. So it's crazy though, because we were told that this is the greatest military in history. So Russia is so trash, Russia is so bad, and America is the greatest military in history. So why is America changing itself based on trash Russia? Doesn't make sense. It's almost as if the media was lying about how bad Russia was. Almost as if we were being lied to about the amount of bodies stacking up in Ukraine. But honestly, the best thing to happen is for America to get the hell out of this. This is a Slavic civil war. Ukraine should have surrendered a long time ago. America needs to stop trying to influence this country, sending these people off to die for no reason. Mind your own affairs and put America first. So yeah, that's an update of some of the things going on over there. Let me know what you think. Leave me your thoughts below. Share the video. Thanks for watching.